Thank you so much for making time and joining me. And I think maybe we can just start this off by having you introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Dr. Kelvin Kemm. I'm a nuclear physicist, and I'm currently the chairman of Strategic Global, which is a nuclear project management company based in Pretoria in South Africa. I'm also the past chairman of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, called NESCA.
There's usually a fear when you speak the N-word, nuclear. All you think is, oh, you can't speak about that. It's such a dangerous thing. Why has there been such a connotation when it comes to nuclear energy of us thinking that it's such a dangerous thing, one that we should probably not consider or think about?
Well, let me tell you, the nuclear is the safest, greenest, cheapest, and most reliable electricity that you can get of any sort. Now you ask, why have people been so afraid of it? There's been huge anti-nuclear sentiment around for many years, much of it sadly intentional. Anti-nuclear lobby and extreme green people have gone out of their way to condemn nuclear for no real reason. Obviously, part of it was the bombings of Japan at the end of the Second World War. So the world introduction to nuclear was at blowing two cities flat, which of course is not the best public relations way to start a new technology. But in fact, in the whole history of nuclear power, the only accident that ever killed anybody with radiation was Chernobyl. The famous one, of course, that everybody's aware of is Fukushima. And often it is said, look at that big nuclear disaster. Fukushima was not a nuclear disaster. It was an ordinary industrial disaster, or problem even. Not one single person, zero, was killed by radiation at Fukushima. Not one single, zero, was hurt by radiation at Fukushima. And not one bit of private property, zero, was harmed by nuclear radiation. And there's been absolutely no, zero, genetic effects detected afterwards. So Fukushima did nothing from a nuclear point of view. Of course, it was a financial disaster for the company and also a huge PR problem for Japan. But imagine now if you've got three large aircraft like Boeings or Airbuses parked in a hangar at the airport, and the hangar catches fire and destroys the three aeroplanes. You wouldn't call that a major air accident. You'd call that a fire on the ground that damaged three or wrote off three aeroplanes. Same with Fukushima. Fukushima was written off by a tsunami. It was not a nuclear disaster. So nuclear, if anything, has shown how safe it is with incidents like Fukushima. That after all of that damage and all of that power going out of control, nobody got hurt from radiation.
So there's been constant effort to make nuclear energy seem as a dangerous alternative for people to consider. And the question will be, why has that been the case?
Well, there are two reasons for that. The one is that newspapers love a scare story. And they'd always rather say, ooh, look how bad this is. Ooh, if you live near one, your baby's going to fry and die. Ooh, that's what they want. But the other one has been the extreme greens have done a lot of damage, and the damage mustn't be underestimated. And they don't want anybody, particularly in Africa, to have large sources of electricity. I've had face-to-face discussions with these people who've told me they want to limit Africa's electricity forever to a maximum of 10% growth. Then they say, oh, we don't want an increase in GDP because then they will want to farm more lands. They will buy more tractors. They will use more diesel. They will build more factories. They will do this. And all of that now is bad for the planet. So they've got this romantic idea that you just sit in your mud hut with a solar panel on your roof and you're happy. So many of them are trying to actually put the brakes on GDP. If you look on the internet, you'll see it. It says they do not want GDP growth. They say there should be other measures like happiness index. How happy are you rather than by economic growth? You're supposed to be happy with one cow and a wooden plow and not wanting to drive a smart car. Now, I disagree entirely with it. I want to see big cities across Africa, the sizes of London and Tokyo and New York and so on. There's no reason why there shouldn't be. So we've got to go for massive GDP increase. So your question was, why are people so scared? Because, yes, nuclear can be very dangerous when it's incorrectly handled. If you go to your average pharmacy, buy a packet of sleeping pills because you want a good night's sleep. One sleeping pill will give you a good night's sleep. Why did you take the whole packet? Take the whole packet, you'll never ever wake up. 2 liters of petrol in a little can. you can use it in the lawnmower or something. But if you pour the 2 liters of petrol over your head and light a cigarette, it'll also kill you. So there's lots of day-to-day things that if you handle them sensibly the way they're supposed to be handled, they're perfectly safe. If you do something dumb, then it can kill you. A bucket of water can drown a baby if you leave a bucket of water on the floor and a little tiny baby falls headfirst into the bucket. So the same with nuclear. Nuclear fuel, when it comes out of a nuclear reactor, is very radioactive. And it's like a burning fire. If you go and put your hands in the fire, you'll burn yourself. If you go near a very radioactive source, it'll burn you or kill you. We know that, so it's handled professionally. But as for the day-to-day operation of a nuclear reactor, there's nothing that comes out of a nuclear reactor. No radioactive water, no radioactive gas, no radioactive crud of any sort that goes out into the environment. Anything that comes out controlled in the drum. Even something like white coats used in the laboratory, white gloves, paper towels, bits of cotton, if they're used in the laboratory where there's any radiation, that is all put into a yellow drum, sealed, taken out under controlled conditions, and then buried underground at a professional nuclear waste repository. No nuclear waste is like thrown away in the bush, which is often what the anti-nuclear lobby tries to imply, that we sort of reverse with a truck out into the bush and just throw nuclear waste in the bush. That does not happen. It's an insult.
So I know we can understand how coal energy works, or how petrol works, or how solar works. How does nuclear energy work? Okay.
Well, it's interesting to note that if you look at the total energy content of sugar, it comes out at about 20 megajoules a kilogram, for argument's sake. Petrol is a bit more than twice that. It's about 45 to 50. Nuclear on the same scale is 76 million. So it is an incredible difference. It's a massive, massive difference. You can't believe it. If you draw a graph on a soccer field, the coal will be about as long as a matchbox, and the nuclear will go from the one goal to the other goal. That's the sort of number difference. Now, how does it work? Atoms have a nucleus inside, and it's strongly bound together with nuclear forces, like a bunch of golf balls all glued together. And the forces are very powerful. But if you hit that nucleus just right and you break it in half, it's like taking an orange and slicing it in half with a knife. The two halves fall apart like that.
Yeah.
In the case of nuclear, where you get those two halves, instead of them saying two halves, they pull themselves back into balls, and you get two new balls. And when they go from a cut half into a new ball, they give off a massive amount of energy. They reorganize themselves, and that's where the nuclear energy comes from. It's this energy that's given out by the splitting of an atom, which is called fission. Now, not every atom can split. You can in principle, you can take copper, and you can take iron, and you can take all those things and split them as well. But it's very, 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 very difficult. An easy one to split is a very big one, the biggest naturally occurring atom, which is uranium, that is so big it's just about falling apart by itself. So a relatively small whack, and that happens with another neutron being fired in. It comes in like a bullet hitting a teacup, and when the bullet hits the teacup, it'll break the teacup. And that's what happens. This neutron comes in, smacks into the nucleus, and the nucleus falls into two pieces, and boom, and that's where the energy is released.
So before we get into details, how did you get into this space? Because I know a lot of conversation is going to be science talk, but before we just dive into it, how did you get into the nuclear energy space?
Well, throughout school, I was interested in science. I don't think I knew the word physics in the earlier part of my high school. I started to study some physics at school, of course, but I never really looked at physics as a whole career. As I went up high school, I realized that this physics, which is how things move and how energy works and how light works and all the things that make up day-to-day life of the planet, is all physics. And I realized I was interested in that. So I went to university where I studied physics, and I did a bachelor's degree in physics and mathematics. I then went on to do further study into honors, masters, and then a doctorate, where I started to specialize in nuclear physics. And that was it. And nuclear physics is how these atoms all work, and then how you apply that to build power stations and get the energy out. But nuclear physics is also things like nuclear medicine. And I know that some people in Tanzania have been interested in nuclear medicine. And that is, you can inject somebody with some nuclear material that goes through their bloodstream and it accumulates at a cancer, for example. And then from the outside, you scan the human being and you can see exactly where the cancer is. With nuclear, you'll pick up cancer like a year before any other method. It's by far the most effective way of finding cancers, and it's something which is still in its infancy, but which should spread across Africa rapidly. And I really am interested in things like that too. So nuclear is not only nuclear energy, it's agriculture and medicine, and there are a number of other applications as well. So it's a pretty wide field.
That is so fascinating.
Yes,
to think
absolutely.
of it in terms of medicine.
Absolutely, it is.
Wow. Okay. So now let's get deep into the science. I mean, I might be asking a lot of questions because this is also a learning class for me. So, nuclear energy in relation to growth, GDP. I think you touched a bit about it when you're having a conversation before we started recording. And so there has been a deliberate effort to ensure that Africa doesn't have enough energy supply, right? But this isn't focused in nuclear energy, if I'm right. So now Africa has the option to adopt nuclear energy as a way for it to have constant power supply.
Yes.
Okay. How do we do that?
Well, let's just talk around a little bit about what you just said there, about a conscious effort to stop Africa getting nuclear energy. It's not the big Western countries that have been doing that, right? It's the green extremists who've got this fantasy about the Earth being in trouble because of climate change, which is not true, by the way. There is no problem at the moment. But now let's look at the colonial powers. There's a lot of talk at the moment in South Africa, and I think in other African countries, about economic colonialism now taking place.
Right.
To my mind, there's absolutely no doubt that is happening. But then what happens here quite often, I say, there's this economic colonialism taking place. We better go and stop them. It's their fault. It isn't their fault. It's your fault. It's our fault. If we allow the economic colonialism to take place, it's our fault. The people in the other countries, if you take the advanced Western countries, they are trying to trade for their own benefit. That's what free market economics is all about. They've got a perfect right to try and sell their chairs, their motor cars, their kitchen utensils, fridges, all that sort of thing into Africa. There's no reason for them to stop themselves selling fridges to African countries. It's the African country's job to make your own fridge or to get your fridge from another African country so that you both have a reason to trade with each other over and above just being the customer of the advanced first world.
Right.
So that's where the colonialism is coming from. Part of it, of course, is that there's no great encouragement for us to get more energy, because the more energy we get, the more likely we are to build a factory that makes the fridges, which is what the greenies are trying to stop.
Right.
So we've got to look at how do we increase energy dramatically. Now, over the last 25 years, the world electricity consumption doubled. Some of the greenies come along and say, no, we've got to cut back on electricity consumption to save the planet, energy efficiency. That's nonsense. Energy efficiency, yes, that's in your economic interest. Don't use twice the amount of energy to cook supper than you have to, otherwise you pay for it. So from that point of view, yes. But no, in a country like South Africa, our objective is double the electricity supply and double the electricity consumption as fast as we possibly can. It doubled in the last 25 years. It's going to double even faster in the future, because there are things now using much more electricity than ever in the past, and many more families becoming electrified. So we've got to look at doubling the electricity supply as fast as we possibly can. For all sub-Saharan African countries, what they've got to do is double as fast as they can, then double again, then double again, and then double again.
Wow.
And when people say, hey, stop doing that for the planet, you say, sorry, the welfare of our people comes first. The planet is not our problem right now, also because we don't believe these scare stories about climate change that are being produced all over the place. So we've now got to say, how do we do it? There's this graph in economics, which is a good economics colleague of mine, Leon Lowe, has said is one of the best graphs in economics, because they don't usually come out so well. And it shows that GDP is directly related to electricity consumption. Electricity consumption is the lifeblood of a country, just like your blood supply around your body is your life support. If your blood stops flowing, quink, you stop living. If electricity stops flowing in a country, the country stops operating. So it's absolutely essential to keep an electricity supply flowing, which is guaranteed, it's reliable, and it's inexpensive. So that's very important. Now, what turns out from this economics graph, if you double the electricity supply, you will double the GDP. And there's not a single country in the world that falls below that line. There's not a single country that's become wealthy without having the electricity. So there's no argument about this. If you want your take-home pay to double, you want the GDP to double, and to do that, you need to double the electricity consumption of the country. That's it. There's no argument. So it's actually imperative to find out how quickly can you put more electricity into your country.
And we spoke about uranium being a crucial component in doing that. And how much of that do we have in Africa?
We have loads and loads of uranium. There are a few countries that have a lot. In fact, uranium is spread all over the world, but relatively thinly. Right? Some countries are lucky enough to have concentrations, like South Africa's got quite a substantial contribution, and so is Namibia, for example. The others in the world, like Canada and Australia, which are politically in different positions to the Middle East, where the oil comes from, which is interesting to bear in mind.
Yeah.
But certainly there's no problem with the amount of uranium. There's lots of it, and you use so incredibly little. South Africa's got a big nuclear power station north of Cape Town on the west coast. Now, if that power station ran on coal, it would use 6 train loads of coal every day. But on nuclear, it uses 1 truckload of nuclear fuel every year.
Wow.
That's the difference.
It's a massive difference.
So with a nuclear power station, you can once a year or twice a year supply, and that's that. You don't have to worry like with a coal-fired power station where there's a conveyor belt that keeps running, or a railway line that keeps bringing trains, or continuous trucks or something bringing the fuel. That if you have a big African storm that the river comes up in flood and you can't cross or something like that, that the coal supply stops running.
Yeah.
So that's another huge advantage with nuclear, is that you don't have to worry about a fuel supply like that. And so that's something that's terribly important. So there's every reason for nuclear to be an answer for Africa.
I think I've also come across the graph that shows GDP in relation to energy supply. And it was quite fascinating to see that, as you said, all the most industrialized countries are on top, right? And then you have all the other countries just following below them. So energy growth directly proportional to GDP, which I suppose is directly proportional to industrialization, right? And so how can Africa start adopting nuclear energy?
Well, actually, nuclear energy is far easier than has been created in the minds of many people. Part of the scare story of the Greens over the years has been, nuclear is so dangerous. Nuclear is so complicated. There's no ways that an ordinary African country could possibly do it. That's not true. Every single country in Africa can go nuclear if they want to, without any trouble. You have to start off by getting nuclear legislation on the books. That's essential, so the country knows what its own rules are going to be. You then have to make sure that coincides with what the international people want, and that is now the International Atomic Energy Agency. And I say to people, joining up with the International Atomic Energy Agency is like joining the golf club. When you join the golf club, you agree to be a good member of the golf club. That means you will dress in certain ways, you will behave in certain ways. Out on the green, you will wear certain shoes. There's rules like that. If you break the rules, the golf company, the golf course cannot come along and fine you or throw you in jail. They don't have a police force. At worst, they can tell you to leave the club. And if you leave the club in disgrace, your friends won't invite you to dinner anymore. And your friends won't have anything to do with you. So that is why people behave themselves at the golf club. They want to be seen to be gentlemanly members of the club that everybody else respects. The nuclear business is the same. If you get into the nuclear business, you sign up with the International Atomic Energy Agency and you act like a responsible gentleman in the game. You do things that are right. It's like medical. If you're going to do medical operations, open heart operations or something, you don't do it with dirty scalpels and this and this and this. You all have an international code of conduct that says we're going to do this properly.
Right.
So that's part of what the legislation is, and instilling a nuclear attitude amongst many people, and that is do things right, be proud, have a professional approach to the job. So that's the first thing. But in parallel, you can start training people. You train them in physics. So a good thing if people want to get into nuclear is take physics after school, or science of some sort, chemistry, physics, mathematics, that type of thing, or into technical directions in a technical college where they learn something like welding, tool making, boiler making, and technical skills like that. So they're all of those as well, tradesmen. What's essential is to have the electricians and the various crafts also with the right attitude. Craftsmen that say, I'm proud to be an electrician. I only do my electrical work properly. I don't cut corners. I don't make mistakes. I'm not going to be looked down on by my friends because when the boss is not looking, I cut the corners. So that's what has to be established. And I'm keen with colleagues of mine to get involved with that. We already have people from other African countries coming to South Africa for training. We'd like to trade a lot more with various ways of doing this.
And how has the experience been for those who have been coming to South Africa for training?
We've had a number of people. Just recently, there was a young man from Uganda who had just trained as a nuclear technician for nuclear medicine. And he was a very nice-looking young fellow. And I saw him when I went on a tour around the facility, and he said he'd come from Uganda. And so there are a number coming into the universities, but we need a much more of a thrust between the governments and things encouraging something like this. But to do that, the individual African countries must decide to go nuclear. Now, let me just dwell on that for a moment. You know, when you make a big decision at government level, there's got to be some courage and foresight. Very rarely does a big decision come down to you being able to financially calculate it out entirely accurately. If somebody says, why don't we start farming ducks on a large scale in that particular area, you got to have a look and say, has it got water? Has it? And you come to a feeling that it should work. But you can't beforehand calculate for sure that it's going to be profitable. Somebody's got to say, I'm prepared to take the decision and to push it forward. Far too many people want absolute assurance from somebody else before they make the decision to be a leader.
Right.
So we need the leaders of Africa to say, nuclear is the answer, we're going to do it. Pull together the right type of people and say, right, go ahead. There mustn't be somebody who's worried all the time that the boss is going to jump on me and this and this and this. So we need the leaders to say, let's go for it and start putting the building blocks in place. Then you'll hear people from the Western world say, oh, no, it's far too complicated for you. You're only an African. That's not true, all right? There's no reason why Africa cannot produce all the people it wants for nuclear. The whole works. We collaborate with one another to do it. South Africa, by the way, is the third oldest nuclear country in the world. And we've got major facilities here. People don't realize how long we've been in the game. There's a nuclear power station that has recently started operating fully in the UAE, the first one ever in the UAE, called Baraka. It's 4 nuclear reactors, a big place. There are 300 South Africans working on the plant that were involved from day one building that plant. 300, which is quite staggering. So we're very proud of the fact that our guys have gone around the world to take nuclear skills around the world. So then people say, oh, nuclear is complicated. No, it's not complicated. Now, I don't want some newspaper to say, I said it's easy. No.
Right, yeah.
Flying an aeroplane is complicated to a degree. Obviously, if you're a pilot in an aeroplane, but it's not beyond African countries to have aeroplanes. It's not beyond African countries to have car construction or things like that.
Yeah.
It's complicated, but you do it with a will and you do it professionally. So you can do the nuclear. Then another aspect that needs to be brought into play is that up until nowish, all the reactors of the world have got bigger and bigger and bigger. And they tend to be on the coast. In fact, they're all on the coast or on very big dams, lakes like in Canada or Russia, where there's massive lakes that are guaranteed to stay full all the time because they're in snow areas and so on. That was because the first ever nuclear reactors were like submarine power packs for nuclear submarines that had all the free water they want.
Yeah.
So when they wanted cooling, they said, let's put them on the coast. So it evolved like that. Now, in South Africa, we started developing a small reactor called a small modular reactor. So when you look around the world and say, where are all these large nuclear reactors? They're on the coastline or on big lakes, like Lake Baikal in Russia and so on. So then they say, oh, numbers of African countries don't have an ocean. So we realized that in South Africa because South Africa also has very little inland water. We've got two oceans, the Atlantic on the one side and the Indian Ocean on the other, but you go a little bit far inland and there's no water there. So we developed what's known as a small modular reactor, which is much smaller than a big reactor, and most important, it does not need water cooling. We've designed it to use helium gas cooling, so you can put it anywhere you like. And that's terribly important because many other small modular reactors are coming about around the world now, but most of them require water cooling. So you still have to put them near a water source, because in Europe and the US and so on, they have the water sources quite easily available. We don't.
Right.
So we went for the no water option. Of course, the other huge advantage with the small modular reactor that does not need water is you can take it to where you want the electricity. We've been approached by big mining operations in various African countries saying, we've got to get our electricity from hundreds of kilometers away because we have to go to where the mine is.
Yeah.
We say, well, we can now bring the reactor to the mine and we can put it at the mine. Now, to give you an illustration of size, I'm not saying a big reactor or a small reactor. I'm saying you can have both. If you're fortunate enough to have the ocean, or you're fortunate enough to have a very large, reliable dam where the water level won't go down, then you can put a big reactor there. It's like, imagine if you own an earth-moving company. You'll have a 5-ton truck and a little truck, which we call a bakkie in South Africa. And the little one you send to go and get 20 bags of cement. You wouldn't send the 5-tonner to go and collect 20 bags of cement. You use them where they are most appropriate. So the small modular reactors, not only can they be far away from the electricity supply, they can be independent. You can have one reactor that's running a whole town that's not at all connected to the national grid. There's no need to actually have a national grid. There's this concept that you need a national grid. You don't. When electricity first started and started to spread in places like New York, I was just a few weeks ago in New York as a guest speaker at a conference there, and I walked through the park in New York where the first ever electricity was demonstrated. So it was quite a historical little walk that. It started, and then it went down a couple of roads, and a few more roads, and a few more roads. They didn't start with a national grid over the United States. Similarly in the UK, when the first electricity came about with like streetlights, it started and it spread and spread and spread and spread. And so we don't have to assume that an African country has to have a huge national grid for starters. What you've got to be able to do is put the electricity wherever you actually want it, like with a small modular reactor. And then what you do is you have a very small grid. You can have a grid as small as, say, 2 kilometers across or something like that.
Right.
And you then do what you like. If you want to expand it in due course to connect with somebody else's, you can do that. You can expand it and then connect it up with the next door grid, or just make it larger and eventually connect to the national grid or whatever you wish. So that is hugely beneficial, because that also means that anybody can own the reactor. You know, there's been an assumption now that governments own these things. Now, obviously, governments can be owners, but there's no reason why a province can't own its own nuclear reactor. That's catching on quite a bit in South Africa. They're thinking about it.
Right.
Or a municipality in a large city, or in fact even a factory or an agricultural grouping. Now, we've been invited by 3 different agricultural groupings to go and do discussions and demonstrations to them, which we've done. Initially we thought, yeah, agricultural grouping, a farm. When we went there, we discovered, oh no, that's not what we're talking about. They're talking not only about the whole farm, but about the delivery systems, an abattoir, a processing plant for chickens, canning, then labeling and all that. So when you look at it, the power consumption is perfectly matched up to a small reactor. It's not that the reactor is way bigger. Another thing with the reactors too is that nuclear has been declared green by the European Union. So now nuclear qualifies as green electricity, where of course coal and things still on. So there's quite a movement. If you want to get international funding, some countries or municipalities or provinces, the international funding sometimes will say, on condition that you show us that you got at least 20% green energy. What they're trying to do is twist the arm of Africans to have solar or wind.
All right.
And now you can say, all right, we can do that. We put a nuclear reactor. A question you might well want to ask is, how long does this take? At the moment, we're developing the first reactor in South Africa, which is called the FOAK, the first of a kind. That takes about 5 years, because with it is all the legislation and the testing and the proving that it passes all the tests laid down by the regulator and so on. But after that, we're aiming at about 3.5 years construction time. Now, if you look at a big solar plant, there they're quoting 2 years, 2.5 years or something construction time. So it looks as if it's quicker. There's no argument that it's quicker, but we design our nuclear reactor to last 60 years, and it'll probably last 80. Solar is designed to last 20 years, but in fact, I'm finding that it's lasting a lot less than that. But if it is even if it achieves this 20, you still got to do 3 solars in a row before you equal the lifetime of the nuclear reactor. So that has got to be taken into account in the financial calculations. And if I said to you now, come over and visit me tomorrow, it's only 100 kilometers away. You've got an option of walking there, or going in a car, or going on a bicycle. And I say to you, well, you do one of the 3. And you say, well, the cheapest way to come to you is by walking. So, well, then you can walk. Now start tonight and you should get there tomorrow. Or maybe you can go and buy a bicycle and then it'll be quicker. Or maybe you can get a car. And if you get a car, you can do it often. So if you say, oh no, the car is far too expensive, I'll walk instead. That's not a sensible decision. The decision is allow to get a bank loan to buy the motor car now and go tomorrow to the meeting. And then for the next 10 years, you can use the same motor car to go to all other meetings. And that's where so many people come and say, oh, it's cheaper to put in solar panels. Yes, it is if you look at the immediate capital cost of putting the solar panels in. But you've got to do it again after 20 years, then again after another 20 years. And, of course, solar is highly intermittent. It's somewhat reliable that if it's in a sunny area, at least you guarantee to get the solar every day at lunchtime, but you guarantee to have none at night. And you only get 50% at mid-morning and 50% in the afternoon. You get your maximum at lunchtime, and then it goes away like that on both sides. So you don't have solar at breakfast, and you don't have solar at dinner, and you don't have any in the night. So if you want to watch television or listen to the radio or have lights in your house, solar won't do it. So then people say, all right, we'll put in batteries. If you put in batteries, you've then got to put in another solar system at least as big as the first one. Usually you've got to put in 2 solar systems as big as the first one if you want them to charge the batteries. You can't use the same solar to draw electricity during the day and charge the batteries at the same time. So they don't tell you that if you want to charge batteries to use in the dark, you've got to have 2 or 3 solar systems, so multiply the amount of money by 2 or by 3. And you're still not certain. Because if you have a week of rainy days, you might not have your fully charged batteries. There's wind as another option. If you've got a guaranteed windy area, you can have wind. But the wind is highly intermittent. At least the solar you're probably going to get at lunchtime. Wind, you could have 3 or 4 days when nothing happens. And wind, even if the wind's blowing too strongly, you have to put the brakes on the turbine, because if it goes too fast, it breaks itself. So wind and solar, I've never ever said anything against wind and solar or written anything against wind and solar per se. I've said you're not going to run an electric train 1,000 kilometers on wind or solar. You're not going to. You're not going to run mining activities. You're not going to run suburban electric trains or things like that on wind and solar. You're not going to.
So you're not going to be able to run heavy energy demanding
Absolutely
activities
not.
with.
But if you say run a pig farm and you want to have a feeding system for the pigs at lunchtime where you grind up the mealies, the corn, and you then have a little conveyor belt or something taking it to the pigs or whatever. If you only want that thing to work for 2 or 3 hours in the day, that you can connect to a solar panel. And if that makes economic sense for the farmer, then do it. If you want to fill water tanks or a dam and you have a wind turbine that you can electrically connect to an electric pump that pumps water up from under, then do it. If you want to have any other thing where you're prepared to live with the intermittent nature of Mother Nature, then make your energy fit what Mother Nature is going to give you. If you force it to not fit Mother Nature, then it's going to cost you more money. Whereas now nuclear, of course, doesn't worry about Mother Nature. Nuclear just runs flat 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, forever. It just runs dead steady at more than 90% of what's known as the capacity factor. And the capacity factor is what's the theoretical maximum. Now with wind and solar, something that irritates me is that you so often see the newspapers say, oh, a new solar installation has just been put in, it's 100 megawatts. But that's its nameplate. It means that's what's written on the plate that's stuck on the bottom of the the container. This is 100. That means you'll get 100 megawatts at lunchtime on a day when everything's perfect, but at night you'll get nothing.
That's the maximum capacity.
That's called the maximum capacity. And the capacity factor is what percentage of that you actually get on average. In the case of solar, it's about 25% if you're lucky. The case of wind, it's about 1/3 if you're lucky. But you can get nothing for days.
Wow.
And so, in fact, the wind has turned out in reality to be much under that. The Germans found that over a period of some years, the wind came out at 17%. So by far, most of the time, it's standing there not doing anything. So the wind is not, and the solar is not, an answer to a continuous baseload supply, which is what you need for the health of the nation. Nuclear is the answer. And small nuclear reactors too, because they're much cheaper. You can put them where you like, and they're very safe. Our reactor was built to be what's known as walk-away safe. That means for the worst of anything you can think of were to happen, all you do is just go down the road and have a cup of coffee with your buddies and talk about it. Just leave the reactor alone, and it will switch itself off over a period of about a week. Just leave it alone, and it will perfectly safely switch itself off, cool down, and do everything. That is what happened at Fukushima, was that it didn't do that. Fukushima, when the earthquake occurred, it shook the reactor, and the reactor cuts itself down, but it was still hot. It's like if you've been running your motor car for a while and you switch the engine off, you don't open the bonnet and put your hand on the engine block. You'll burn yourself. Fukushima, it switched off, so the reactor was not running, but it was still very hot. And then the cooling systems failed. Modern motor cars often too, when you switch the car engine off, there's a fan that keeps going and the water goes around cooling the engine down so that you don't harm the engine. That's what Fukushima had. They had a circulatory system that was supposed to keep running when the reactor had to do an emergency shutdown, but it didn't. The water damaged it, and the circulatory cooling system did not work, and nor did some of the backup to the backup to the backup. All that failed. So the drama at Fukushima was a failure of the cooling system. It wasn't actually the reactor that went haywire. But our reactor cannot do that. It's perfectly safe. So we've built our, designed and our reactor for African conditions, which means hot and cold and far and dusty and elephants walking over the road and all sorts of things like that. We took that into account, which you won't find is taken into account of designs that come out of England or some other European country.
So the reactors that you're building, how much energy can they produce? Right.
We have what's called the HTMR, High Temperature Modular Reactor, HTMR 100. That's 100 megawatts. But that's 100 megawatts of heat. Now that converts to 35 megawatts of electricity. And that's a law of physics. We can't make it better by doing something better. A law of physics tells you if you have a heat flow, the amount of electricity you can get out is about 1/3. So that's it. However, if you've got a system like in South Africa, we have Sasol, which takes coal and turns coal into petrol, ladies' lipstick, face cream, and things like that. What they've got to do is take that coal, heat it up, and then chemically dissociate it and then reassociate it into the other chemicals that they want. For that, they need heat. So you can now take the heat straight into something like that Sasol process without going. So then you can use the whole 100 megawatts. If the other processes that need heat, like factories that are processing food or doing all sorts of things like that, because many people use electricity to make something hot industrially. So you can do that, or if it's the electricity, it's 35. But, good question you asked. Our system has been designed to take up to 10 reactors on one control room. And so you can add another 35 whenever you like, going up to like 350. And it costs a lot less because you don't need another admin building, another workshop, another load of power lines coming in and all that. So it's much cheaper to add extra reactors either when the demand asks for it or when you've got the money that you feel you want to do it. We recently had an inquiry from Lesotho that asked us for a 10-reactor setup right now to be designed, which we did, and we supplied them with the designs for a 10-reactor setup, which also had to be on the side of a mountain, because it was supplying into the mining industry and into other areas. And they also want to sell into South Africa. They've got a license to sell into South Africa already. So that meant now that we had to put the reactor sort of in a row along the side of a mountain.
Mm.
We've also been asked to design reactor complexes for Namibia and for the Middle East, which is now out in this desert, and it's flat. There you can put them in a square, if you like, or a triangle, whatever you like, so you can distribute them to different places close by one another. So you've got a lot of latitude as to how you want to do it. Of course, also, we would be very pleased to be exporting our reactor into other African countries and to have a collaboration with them. We realize that local content is very important. We anticipate that we would use local people to dig the foundations, pour the concrete, do all the bricklaying, concrete works, as much of the electrical work and all sorts of other stuff as possible. So we are aware of that. As a South African, I've been on the receiving end of the bad end of that for many years, where we've had people from first world countries here coming here on the assumption that we South Africans are too stupid to do things by ourselves, and they want to come and show us how to connect a telephone or how to connect an electric pump or something like that. We say, we don't need you to come and tell us that. We're not stupid. We know that African countries are not stupid. They can do many of those things themselves, and with a bit of training, there's others that can be added. So I emphasize that we would work in great collaboration with other African countries like that.
And what are the size of these modulators? How do they look?
One reactor complex will easily fit on a football field. In fact, we can compress it down to half a football field if you want to squeeze it. Now, if you built one in Europe, in a place like Holland or Belgium, you wouldn't even get half a football field. But we have the luxury of space in Africa, so we have some distance between the reactor and the admin building, and there's open spaces and so on. So a football field. But you can also get 10 reactors pretty much on a football field, because all you got to do is put another reactor which looks like a concrete silo sticking out of the ground. So it's like one of the corn silos that you find on a farm, agricultural silo. It looks about, in fact, it's narrower, but it looks something like it. It's not huge. You know. We haven't built the first reactor yet. We're still in the position of doing that. The Chinese have got one based very much on our design, which started running 2 years ago, their demo model. We know something about it, but not that much, because they don't tell the world that much about it. And so that one's working, and what's happened is it's done exactly as we predicted. So it's our design, effectively, that they are very similar, and so we're very pleased to see that it works. But you've got to decide if you want to go with a country like South Africa to have a collaboration. But we're very confident that what we've done will work. Some prototypes have been done here, in the sense that we originally had a program called the PBMR, the Pebble Bed Modular Reactor, and that they actually started building. And the pressure vessel arrived, there were some sub-assemblies made, and then the government decided to put it on hold for a while into what's known as a care and maintenance state, but it never was reactivated. And that was for political reasons, economic reasons, nothing to do with the technology. At any stage. Our HTMR 100 is a derivative of that reactor. So we know that the systems will work. There's been lots of tests and assemblies made and so on. And another important thing is we can make the fuel. Now the fuel is interesting, because when people think of coal as a fuel, all you do is chop the coal out with a pickaxe and then throw it in the boiler. That's not how it works with uranium. With the uranium for this fuel, you've got to take the uranium into little grains, like grains of sugar, and you coat each one of those with a ceramic coating, so it's like its own shell around, like an egg. Imagine how the uranium is the yolk of an egg, then around that you have some carbon to cushion, and then the shell of the egg is your silicon carbide, and then you have another bit of soft stuff on the outside so it can move around without breaking. So it's like having a whole lot of eggs. Then you put all that together in a carbon matrix, and it gets rolled up into a ball about the size of a tennis ball. Now 6 of those will supply all the electricity for a family of 4 for 10 years. So you could actually take the family's lifetime use of electricity and carry it in one kit bag. That's how powerful the uranium is.
Wow.
Now to make that fuel, make those little grains of uranium and coat them all and all that is quite a complicated process. We can do it. We did that, and at the moment the United States can't do that, and nor can anybody else in Europe. And so it's something we're rather proud of, but we're in a position now to supply the fuel. And also we understand that other African countries will say, wait a minute, we're not going to rely on one supplier. We want to have more than one. So we've taken that into account. So we say, all right, we would be happy to look into licensing fuel suppliers elsewhere. We can build 2 or 3 plants in other places, or if countries insist, they can have their own, just like it's done with oil refineries to some degree, or certain other things that you need to know that you would own. So that's important. The energy security of knowing that the reactor doesn't come from somebody who's going to switch you off, and that your fuel is not going to come from somewhere where you know that somebody will cut your fuel supply lines.
It gives you total control of your energy.
Absolutely. That's terribly important, as has been seen recently in Europe with the Ukraine-Russia affair. The gas suppliers that were going into places like Germany, the Germans never thought, where's the gas coming from? It was coming from the war zone. And when that happened, there was interruptions in the gas supplies and so on. So now they are realizing the energy security of small modular reactors. So there's been a large pro-nuclear move in many European countries now, which you can see easily if you just look it up on the internet.
We are capable of producing the technology, but how does the policy on the ground look like in terms of having conversation with African leaders who are in the position of making the decisions to adapt such technology?
Well, as I said earlier, we need the African leaders to have the courage of their convictions. I was guest speaker at the African Union's Economic Summit in 2017 when I spoke about some of this. And a lot of the African leaders came to me over the next couple of days and said, we didn't realize we could do that. Now we need to have the courage of people to not allow themselves to be economically colonized by the traditional colonizers. You've got to say, let's do it. But by saying let's do it, you got to bring together teams of companies and other people in a free market economics type of way and let them get on with it. You cannot do this with one government department in control, that they say when the bricks are going to be delivered and they say that's not going to work. So we need to find a freedom of thought and a combination of attitude to say we can do this by ourselves. Let's go out now and do it. So we found there's a lot of pro-nuclear sentiment. We recently were invited to go to Namibia, which we did, and we were taken on a site visit in Namibia. We've been dealing with a number of other African countries. Only next week are we going to another country nearby. We've been invited to go and visit the Minister of Energy and many others. We're doing that as well. So we found that there's been interest from countries like Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, on the western coast, Ghana, Nigeria, and numbers of others. We've had visits also from Mauritius, for example. And so there's a lot of interest. But obviously people are saying, I wonder if we're doing quite the right thing. Let's watch and see who moves first. So we need people to have the courage of their convictions to make a move. Now that you mentioned that, South Africa has a large nuclear regulator. That's the legal grouping. It's 159 people as of now, and it's one of the oldest regulators in the world. So we're not new kids on the block in that. You know, I get phone calls from people from Europe and US and say, by the way, do you know what nuclear regulation is? And I say, yes, we have been in it for nearly 40 years, and we've got one of the oldest regulators in the world. They assume we don't know what we're doing. Now, our regulator definitely is in a position to interact with anybody else. In fact, I would want to very much encourage it. You saw with Fukushima that when the incident happened, people from around the world were flying in to help the Japanese. They were sending their nuclear professionals in. There's that spirit of brotherhood in nuclear. If something were to go wrong in an African country, others would say, we're coming today to come and help you. So we need to establish that now. There are already various Southern African groupings of electricity producers, Southern African Power Pool, for example, and so on. We need to build the nuclear into that now so that we trade with each other spiritually on the regulators working together, similar regulations, rules, laws, and all that sort of thing. But I've got no fear that that can be easily done with Africans looking after themselves. We do not need to go and get somebody from Europe to come and tell us how to do that. We know what we're doing.
So we have the capability to do that, and we understand how it works.
Africans must come up with solutions for Africa in Africa and stand on their own 2 feet and not say, I'm being colonized by somebody else, it's their fault. No, those days are past.
A good start to that now would be having enough constant power supply.
Yes.
And then nuclear provides such an alternative, like a really good alternative compared to the other sources that exist on the continent right now. And we also have the resources, as always.
Yeah, if private companies want to go nuclear in any African country, they must get the support of their government, like the mining groups. We've been approached by a number of mining groups and other groups from other African countries saying, we want the security of knowing that our electricity is okay. If somebody wants to do that, a mining group, agricultural grouping, industrial grouping, something like that, their government should say, we're right behind you, we're going to support you, not say we're going to block you because only the government controls electricity. That's the sort of thing that we need, the mentality of somebody saying, I'm going to be a true leader, I'm going to now encourage growth rapidly.
Listening to this makes me wonder, why don't we have such more conversations about nuclear energy? Because it's like, this is the best option that we have, and yet nobody speaks about it. And it's as if it's a topic that we're saying, yeah, we can't have that conversation.
Recently in Kigali in Rwanda, there was a meeting there with the International Atomic Energy Agency. The Director General Rossi was there. And there was a pleasing number of countries that came together there. And they said, come on, guys, let's do this, you see. And they probably all went out feeling enriched and spiritually and so on. But what they must do is go home and still do it. Another one is scheduled in South Africa soon at Sun City, and I know a number of people already coming from other African countries. I'm a speaker there. And so we need to help each other out and make people feel comfortable and confident. And so I appreciate the uphill. I mean, I've been in it as well. When somebody says, have you got the courage or the convictions and your belief in yourself to do it? You ought to say, well, yes, but if somebody else was to be friendly with me, it would help.
Yeah.
Just recently, I was seeing some news as sort of revived of the world's first heart transplant being done by Professor Barnard in South Africa. And at the time, the world was astounded. They said, how on earth could a country like South Africa beat the United States and the UK and Europe? And we did. And everybody was startled largely because it came from Africa.
Yeah.
It was a great achievement. Now it's done all over the world. And I think a lot of people in the world still would not believe that that came from South Africa. But that was done. And then other people said, well, okay, if he can do it, why can't we do it? And more got in. We now need that same spirit to go along and say, let's build small modular reactors in many African countries because we're all going to club together and help each other out. And it's going to be a spirit of Ubuntu from within. We're not waiting for somebody from the first world to come and hold our hand and show us what to do.
There are lots of other uses of nuclear that could be implemented in the continent, not just energy. But obviously energy is such a massive one.
Well, there's nuclear medicine. South Africa is one of the biggest exporters of nuclear medicine in the world. We send a huge amount to the United States, for example. But every 3 minutes, somebody somewhere in the world is injected with nuclear medicine from Pretoria. And every 3 hours, somebody's life is saved. 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And that goes out. And that's done here near Pretoria by South Africans. And every day an export takes place because it's the speed which counts. We undertake to inject anybody in the world in under 36 hours from the material coming out of the reactor. So when it goes to like Rio, out of the reactor, gets all processed into a vehicle, off to the airport, into an aeroplane, lands in Rio, through all the whatever customs and that on that side, to the hospital and into the patient by tomorrow.
That is
that's
so
quite spectacular.
I've never heard of that.
Yes.
I've never heard of that.
I was very proud to stand up in Russia some time ago and be awarded a trophy on behalf of South Africa for best nuclear medicine company in the world. And that was the people at NESCA.
In the world. Wow. Why aren't we hearing more stories of this? I mean, it's...
Well, you touch on a very interesting point. Now, I can talk for another 3 hours on that. People like singers and dancers are very good at marketing themselves and advertising. People like scientists, engineers, and technicians are bad. Scientists and engineers are really bad at going out and telling people what they do. What they do is they go to parties and they sit and drink a couple of beers and complain bitterly how everybody doesn't understand them. If you say, why don't you go and tell? No, he said, they don't understand me, so it's pointless me going to tell them. So one of the problems is when we've had industrial successes and technological successes, nobody tells anybody. And the science and engineering fraternity is very guilty. since I am one, I can say that they're guilty. It's time they did much more about telling the average person what goes on in the world of science and technology.
And I think also just like what you're doing right now, breaking it down for people to understand, because we think it's such a complex topic, but it really is not. I mean, when you try and break it down and explain the bits of it.
Yes, and this is business. You must see the amount of problems I've had talking to editors of business newspapers saying, why don't you cover so? I said, no, we're a business newspaper. We deal with banking and the stock exchange and the insurance. I said, but that's not banking. That's not, business is not that. Business is somebody making something and selling something.
And
the bank comes in to help them get the lubrication. It's like putting oil on the machine. But they keep thinking what business is banks, building societies, insurance companies, and money stuff on the stock exchange. If you go and say business is making cars and selling them, business is making pumps and electric no, so we don't understand that. No, we read business. You've no idea how difficult it is to get business editors to understand that business starts with somebody having an idea to make a thing and make the thing and sell it. You know, the money just comes along the way. Banks don't make money. Banks just take somebody else's money, move it from here to here, take a bit, move it from here to here, take a bit.
Is it the fear that it's probably not an easy topic for people to grasp, such that they're like, no, we're not going to put that out because we feel like people are not going to probably not be interested in it or not understand what you guys are talking about because it's all like physics and nuclear and such things?
Yeah, you're quite right, Renatus, absolutely. It's complex, and so there's a whole science involved in trying to talk layman's language when you're talking science.
Right.
So that also needs to be very much addressed. You know, like trying to explain to somebody how a cell phone works or trying to explain to somebody how something or other works.
Right.
Often people come along and say, can you explain just in the next 2 minutes, tell me. The answer is, well, no, it takes a 2-hour preparation before you can understand enough. So
Right.
that is part of the problem. But nevertheless, we've got to overcome it with posters, pictures, you know, videos these days, not only talking complex language.
Because I'm feeling like the technology in itself, massive strides, right? But I think now the work of explaining it and the marketing and the speaking about it and helping people understand what it is that's happening on the ground, that's the part that needs to be done. And in reality, that should be the easiest part, you know, compared to the work that is actually being done on the ground.
Yeah. But now you take complicated things like Einstein's theory of relativity, for example, and the famous equation E equals mc squared, which is the basis of nuclear power. And Einstein must have been asked so many times. I've been asked so many times at cocktail parties and whatever. Just explain that thing to me briefly. Famously, some newspaper reporter spoke to Einstein and said, can you just tell me the theory of relativity just in a few words? And Einstein said, yeah, sure. But can you tell me how to fry eggs and bacon for breakfast in just a few words? On the assumption that I don't know what an egg is, I don't know what a hen is, I don't know what bacon is, I don't know what a pig is, I don't know what frying is, I don't know what oil is. Can you do it? The reporter said, no. And he said, same with me. You know, he can't start explaining the peak of Mount Everest when nobody understands that there's a bottom underneath that thing. And so that's part of the problem. You've got to figure out a sensible way of doing that.
But how has that process been like of trying to communicate to people?
There are numbers of people trying it, but not anywhere near enough effort has been put in. You know, there's huge advertising on ballet and singing and so on, and everybody knows what a guitar is, and everybody knows what a piano is, and so it's very easy to go and explain a new band or a new ballet or something like that. But if people didn't know what a guitar was, and they didn't know what a piano was, and they didn't know what that was, and you said, now explain the symphony orchestra, so that's now a big job. So I understand how difficult it is, but there's some people that are talented in doing it, and you also need to get some of the scientists and actually give them lessons on how to talk.
Right.
Because some of them are up at 10th year level of education, and say simplify it, and they drop from 10 to 8. They've got to drop from 10 to 1.
Exactly. I mean, really the basics.
Yes.
Really the basics. So I'm thinking, well, I'm listening to this and I'm going like, what the hell is a nuclear reactor? I mean, I've never pictured that. I don't even know how it looks. And now you're trying to explain to me how it works, let alone how it looks. So,
well, you know, as I said to you, the atom, when you split the atom in half, out comes the energy. So now you've got to put all those atoms in there, start splitting them inside a tank. And as the tank gets hot, this helium gas comes past and takes the electricity out. You know, that's it in very elementary terms, but you're quite right. You know, we need to start teaching people from primary school.
Yeah.
So they get an understanding.
Really, it starts from the uranium and then the whole process, because I feel like in reality, I don't know. You are the expert in the field. Maybe it might be a complicated process, but I also feel like the fact that it's not a topic that people hear about or listen to or watch, then it becomes way hard for them to understand when you're trying to explain it to them for the first time, right? But again, if that started earlier, then it also becomes easier for you to also explain it to them, because now you have to start from grade 1 all the way to what you're actually doing, and that's such a long time to do that.
But also, new technologies are so mysterious. When cell phones first came about in South Africa, I got a contract from one of the big cell phone companies to go around the country explaining it, and also to do some TV series on TV on how cell phone work. And I look back now and I laugh. At one stage, I went to some young lady in the street and I said, well, what do you think of cell phones, can talk like? And she said, well, the big problem I have is my granny goes shopping, and she's 80-something years old, and she just goes shopping. We have a rule in the house. She's not allowed to go out of her place unless she tells us where she's going. But she never obeys. She just goes shopping. We get cross with her. So I said, well, she needs a cell phone. So if something happens, she calls you. She said, no, but nobody knows where she's going. And I said, but the cell phone will know. She said, no. And I said, yes. And she said, but we live here and she lives there. And I said, yes, but if you just phone her. She said, no, but she might be at the supermarket, or she might be at the post office. Nobody knows where she said, no, but the cell phone knows where she is. She said, no, you see. And what a job it was to convince this girl that the cell phone knew where the granny was.
Right.
And when you think of it, most people, you say, how does the cell phone know where the granny is? Oh, I don't know. Now they just accept that it does.
Right.
If you're sitting under your favorite tree, you can make a phone call.
That is true.
And similarly with GPS, now you have GPS, and you want to go to somewhere in the middle of Tanzania, go tick and say, this is how you go. Nobody said, but there are 4 satellites up there telling you how to drive.
Yeah.
And so when something new comes about, it's sort of incomprehensible until you get past a certain position.
So now the goal is to get the early adopters and then spread from there.
Well, I had an invitation a few days ago to go and give a talk at a high school. So I went along. I haven't done that for years and years and years. Boy, what an eye-opener. I went to the high school and they were 15, 16 and 17 years old. So I'm talking to them. I start saying things like, well, you remember the days before cell phones? I said, no. Now I realize that the 15-year-olds have no comprehension of the day before. And I want you to say, remember when there was no email? No. Wow, you see. And I had to quickly say to myself, well, when they were 5 or 6 or 7 years old, they were too young to understand anything. So I'm only allowed to use the last 10 years as a remember when. Now you suddenly limit it in my mind to the last 10 years only. What can I think about in the last 10 years that didn't exist before? And gee, it's difficult. And here these guys are all listening with big eyes like this. They got no comprehension of the days before cell phones, the days before email, and all sorts of things like that. You realize, the times change, of course.
Absolutely. And I think hopefully in the next 50 years, we're going to have the same reactions when you speak to people about, remember a time before nuclear energy existed.
Oh, people are going to say in 20 years' time, they're going to say, do you remember back in 2025 when nobody understood that? They're going to think it's funny that us primitive people of 2025 couldn't understand that. Which, by the way, that's going to be nuclear. In 20, 30, 40 years' time or something, when the whole world is running on nuclear, the history teachers are going to say, you know what? There was a time before 2025 when people didn't believe that nuclear was going to take over the whole world. They said, no. They said, yes, they didn't understand. No. Because now there's movement to put engines into big ships, nuclear-powered. They're already nuclear-powered submarines and aircraft carriers, so making it commercial. So there's nuclear-powered things now that are coming about that people didn't contemplate as real only just a couple of years ago.
And I think in terms of adopting power energy, I think nuclear energy is going to help Africa leapfrog.
Yes, absolutely.
Just trying to imagine where you have no load shedding at all.
Incidentally, right now in South Africa, the nuclear electricity from Koeberg is the cheapest electricity in South Africa by far. Wow. By far. So what you've got to do is, I said earlier with that analogy about whether you walk or take the car, you've got to look into the future. It's like the difference between renting a house or buying a house. So I can't go and buy a house. I don't have that much money. You say, but you don't pay cash for it right now. You're going to take out a bond and you pay it off over 20 or 30 years. Then it's monthly wise very affordable. So what you want to look at with nuclear, say, what is it going to cost me when I buy a kilowatt hour of electricity? Not the greenies come and tell you can't afford it because it's a big lump sum to pay in the beginning. Obviously, it's a big sum to pay in the beginning, like when you buy a car. Very few people have got the money to walk into a shop, buy a new car and pull the cash out of their pocket and walk out. You buy it on some scheme, and which is what you do with a house. Just the years are longer, which is what you do with a nuclear reactor. Also, by the way, the years are no longer than a house. If you look at the time that you calculate the payment of a nuclear reactor, if anything, it's less than what you'll repay on a house that you buy privately.
Most of the time we speak about, as Africa, we need to industrialize and build industries and factories and manufacture things. But we rarely speak about the energy required to do those things.
Yes. Well, absolutely. If you don't plan to have lots of energy that's reliable and inexpensive, then industry won't follow. But if you do have lots of electricity that's reliable and inexpensive, electricity will flow out and industry will come by itself. You don't have to induce people to come along. They'll see they can make money by building the factory that makes fridges or stoves or something. They'll just come.
So some of the ways to convince people would be, nuclear energy is way cheaper, it's reliable and safe. Like really safe?
Absolutely. But people must also have some faith in the qualified people. If you've never ever seen anybody buy a house, if I came to you and said, buy a house, you say, but it's going to cost me loads of money. I don't have that money. And I said, doesn't matter. Sign on the dotted line anyway. Just buy the house and agree to pay it off over 20 years. You say, but nobody I know has done that. I've never seen it done before. Clearly it's going to be scary, you see. So you got to say, well, the professional nuclear science people and the professional economics people that do the calculations have come to the conclusion that it's a very sensible, reasonable thing to do. And it is. Unfortunately, some of the anti-nuclear greenies come out and they try to upset it because they don't want you to have the power. They want you to put a solar panel on your roof and sit there at night with a candle, this type of thing. And that's true, unfortunately. They absolutely deliberately do that. I said they've said to my face they want to limit Africa's electricity growth to 10% ever, not per annum, ever. Because if too many Africans come into the first world, they'll be producing smoke and this and spill diesel on the ground and all that. That'll happen. So there will be something like that. But you have other controls for that. You have pollution controls and just good sense controls of life. So
honestly, I thought solar was such a better alternative until hearing what you just shared. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Why was I thinking that?
Well, there's 600 million people across Africa now that don't have any electricity at all. Now, I've said internationally, you can reduce the carbon dioxide output across Africa by building coal-fired power stations, good ones, because of all those 600 million that are cooking on fires made of wood, dung, bits of plastic fallen, charcoal, all this sort of thing. That's producing all sorts of muck into the air and immediately to the family that is sitting around it. So you could actually improve the health and welfare and the CO2 output thing, which I understand is a political requirement right now to be seen to be cooperative with the carbon dioxide story. Although it's not real science, it's real politics. But if you want to, nuclear, of course, no CO2 output at all, and a coal-fired power station will give you less CO2 output than heaven knows how many thousand fires on dung and wood and whatever else they put in there. So we mustn't be browbeaten by the first worlders. No, you can't do that. You must do as you're told. That's where the economics colonialism comes in. Do as we tell you. You can say, no, we're not. You say, no, we're not going to do. We're going to do what's good for us. Right. That's how you assert yourself to not fall into this economics colonialism trap.
How do you feel about the work that you're doing?
I like very much what I'm doing. So undoubtedly, I've got entertainment out of it. I've got a lot of uphill as well. There's a lot of sleepless nights. But I also like to feel that what I'm doing is a legacy for mankind. When there's nuclear all over the place, people will get reliable, inexpensive electricity that's safe. And I'd like to feel that I was part of that. I'm not building bombs. I'm not building things like that. So I feel good about what I'm doing and what the rest of my team and Stratic Global is doing. We feel good that we're doing things for people.
And South Africa was And I think is the only country in the world that dismantled its nuclear program willingly. Yeah?
Well, South Africa at the moment is the only country in Africa with a commercial nuclear reactor, but Egypt is busy building one. So a couple of years' time, Egypt will have. We were the third in the world to get into nuclear. And that is because early on in the Second World War, it was realized that South Africa had uranium and they wanted the uranium. So they came and asked. So we said, why do you want this stuff? So our government of the day became aware of the importance of uranium leading to nuclear.
Right.
We also had the foresight. We now are the first in the world to start developing a commercial small modular reactor specifically for African conditions. Means dry, no water, dusty, long distances, all that sort of thing. Now many other small modular reactor developers have come about, but usually for their circumstances. They need the water or they need something or other that I don't think is suitable for Africa. So I think we're in a leadership position and we need other African countries to come and stand with us and say, let's be in this thing together.
And I think there is a track record of that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've met numbers of African leaders who say the right things. And obviously they're nervous. I understand that. But they've got to get to the point where they develop the self-confidence and say, let's do it.
Let's do it.
And then get the industrialists and say, do it. And step back.
I think also helping people understand, because I think that would also in a way create pressure for the governments to do it. But yeah, I think everyone is afraid of being early adopters.
Yes.
They're like, yeah, do it first. We're going to see how it goes. And then we'll see if we're also going to jump in.
Yes.
No, but I think the work that you're doing in terms of pioneering nuclear energy in Africa and the reason as to why you're doing it, there's such noble reasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I hope we are going to... We clearly need enough energy in Africa. That's for sure. I don't think there's anywhere in Africa where you can say, oh, we have constant supply of energy, or we have too much power than what we actually need. And the fact that everyone across the continent needs or could use more energy clearly shows that we need more energy. And I think
we should have a slogan that says 100% right now, meaning 100% increase as soon as possible.
And the thing about 10%, that's just scary. It's like...
We mustn't think of 5% more, 10%, 5% per annum, and just say 100% now. How do we do it as quickly as possible?
Going full in. Yeah, no. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for taking your time and sharing your expertise and sharing the work that you have been doing. And it was just such an eye-opener, learning more about nuclear energy and the potential that it has for the African continent.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been very enjoyable, and I just hope that people start to become nuclear aware and become nuclear fans.